In most of North America, bike commuting is still uncommon enough that myths abound. Some of these myths are trivial, but others turn into barriers that prevent people, perhaps including you, from giving bike commuting a try. The point of this video is not to persuade you that you must commute by bike, but to get to the truth behind some common misconceptions so they don't unnecessarily get in your way. When we see lots of folks suited up in Lycra and tearing down the bike path at 25 miles per hour, it's easy to think cycling is something for quote-unquote
serious athletes.
Now obviously, being in better shape does make biking to work easier, but it's not a prerequisite. In fact, if you're able to walk briskly for 20 or 30 minutes, then you're almost certainly fit enough to take up practical cycling. Besides, your fitness will naturally improve with modest but consistent riding, and there's no harm in taking it easy as your heart, lungs, and legs all get into shape. What's more, there's always the option of an e-bike if you have a long, steep commute that's just too much to bite off right now. On this channel and blog, I talk a lot about the best bikes and gear for this and that, and to be sure, it's a delight to have a bicycle that's perfectly tailored to your needs and your riding conditions. But many of us get into bike commuting to save money, not to spend more. Does that mean we're out of luck on a tight budget? Fortunately, no. There are only about 3 critical things that make a bike at least serviceable for commuting. Those are lighting, fenders, and some way to carry your stuff. For a very modest cost, you can add them all by yourself to most types of bicycles, probably including whatever you already own. Even if you do eventually buy a dedicated city or commuter bike, this is a great way to test the waters first. I'll put a link in the description to a blog post that covers these simple accessories in more detail. I've lived most of my life in a region where it rains nearly half the days of the year and bike commuted through all of it, so riding in the rain never seemed odd. But based on the surprised and amused comments I get from colleagues, apparently a lot of folks find it absolutely baffling. The reality is that bike commuting in the rain is about like going for a walk in the rain. Sure, it's nobody's first choice, but with proper clothing, it's just not a big deal either. Of course, your face and hair will get wet, and of course, you'll need to take corners a bit slower and avoid slamming on the brakes, just like you would when driving in the rain. But beyond that, with the proper gear, it makes amazingly little difference. In fact, there's even one unexpected advantage. Whereas car windows fog up in the rain and often blur so badly you can hardly see, your vision on a rainy day bike ride remains crystal clear. Check the link in the description for a guide to clothing for rainy rides. As a Scandinavian saying goes, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. It's widely assumed that cycling makes us sweaty, period. And nobody wants to show up to work disheveled or to take half an hour to stop sweating and freshen up at the office. That's inevitable if you approach commuting like a training session, but remember that intense riding is not obligatory. If you take it a bit easy, like the exertion of just a brisk walk, then that will prevent 90% of the sweat you're concerned about. And the remaining 10% or whatever is nothing you can't handle with a baby wipe and a quick swipe of deodorant when you arrive at work. It's absolutely true that a restrained pace adds a few minutes to your ride, but it also saves time by not having to deal with being a sweaty mess and maybe not even needing special clothing just to ride. If your ride is so long or demanding or hot and humid that even a gentle pace makes you sweat profusely, then an e-bike is always an option to make transportation cycling a better fit for your life. At a relaxed, non-sweaty pace, cycling must be so painfully slow, right? Actually, no, at least not in the city. Besides, most of us would do well to slow down and enjoy the moment for a bit each day, but that's another matter. Anyway, there's no sense comparing yourself on a bike to a car on an open highway, but in town, congestion and stoplights reduce cars to an average of about 15 or 20 miles per hour, and sometimes just a fraction of that. It's obviously slower in major business districts than sparse suburbs, but we generally overestimate our effective speed in a car. And even when cars are faster door to door, driving means we ought to budget additional separate time for exercise. So if your 15-minute drive becomes a 30-minute bike ride each way, but it replaces your half-hour treadmill session, then you might actually be getting time back. I've saved safety for last because it's not so much a myth as an oversimplification. For instance, within half a mile of home, I can find beautiful protected routes, just steps from dangerous places that feel like a game of Frogger. So danger may depend on something as trivial as which side of the street you live or work on. Of course, that's a sign of atrocious infrastructure which is hard to accept in wealthy and ostensibly progressive places, but I'll save that rant for another time. There are places where cycling to work is extremely dangerous, and it's for good reason that most bike commuters in those places are young, fit, daredevil types. On the other hand, safety is extremely local, so it's hard to put too much stock in safety data or anecdotes from places that may or may not reflect your own local conditions. Here are two things to consider. Firstly, it's often possible to pick low traffic routes that add a few minutes but remove heaps of stress. If you have not biked to work before, then I highly recommend scouting out a calm route on the weekend rather than improvising during your first commute. Just because the city painted a bike on the shoulder of a certain road does not mean it's actually the best place to ride. Non-obvious routes may really be a little better, since you'll quickly find that some places look safe from a car but feel quite different when you're on two wheels. Secondly, there are several small but highly effective things within your power to maximize safety relative to any given situation. We cannot control the built environment or the behavior of drivers, but we can control what we anticipate and prepare for, and then decide if that's a level of awareness or exposure that we're comfortable with. There's a link in the description to some absolutely essential tips. A lot of us subconsciously frame cycling as a sport that can also coincidentally get us to work. If you're watching from North America or many other parts of the world, that's reasonable enough, since we culturally tend to regard bikes as toys for kids and weekend hobbies for adults. Hence a lot of the myths and misconceptions we've covered. All in all, first-hand experience puts a lot of these questions to rest. If you're not convinced you can commute without Olympian fitness, or if you're not sure the bike in your garage will really suffice, then the best way to know is just to try. And I'm willing to bet you'll be pleasantly surprised. Thanks for watching, and I'd appreciate your hitting the like button if you found this useful. And please leave a comment if you'd add another myth or misconception to the list, or if you take issue with how I've thought about them. Until next time, have fun, stay safe, and above all, get out there.